This episode is brought to you by Bulletproof Script Coverage, where screenwriters go to get their scripts read by top Hollywood professionals. Learn more at covermyscreenplay.com. I'd like to welcome to the show Sacha Gervasi, man. How you doing, Sacha?
I'm good, man. How are you?
I'm doing great, man. I'm excited to talk to you, my friend. We've talked a little bit off air already, and it's I wish we could have recorded.
We had stories that we frankly cannot put on this podcast.
Obviously, and
for legal reasons.
For legal reasons. So I knew just from those few interactions we've had that this is going to be fun, without question. So I wanted to ask you before we start the whole thing, how did you get into this ridiculous business?
It's ridiculous business. I got into it. Well, I was always fascinated with film. I went to a school in London called Westminster, and I started the film club at Westminster School in about 1980. And what I would do is I would go with my housemaster, a guy called Tristan Jones Parry, who was literally a character out of Brideshead Revisited, a brilliant mathematician, completely ill-functioning socially, but really a wonderful man. He would accompany me to Soho, where we would pick up 16mm prints of films. And so I remember bringing to all my classmates, I was 15 or 16 at the time, movies like Don't Look Now and Easy Rider. And so I loved film at school and, kind of got into actually getting these 16mm prints and putting them in the film club. So I think it was a very early dream, but I never thought I'd actually end up working in the film business because I was for many years, a really terrible musician. And I was struggling with my own mediocrity for quite a few years, even though I ended up in some bands, that actually did some stuff. But the reality was, I think the real dream was always film. Right. And so ultimately what happened was I was in the music business, got out of the music business. And then I decided I was offered an opportunity to work for a very sort of famous British satirical magazine called Punch. A fantastic guy there called Sean Macaulay. I called him up. He was the features editor and pitched him an idea over the phone. I got through to him. His secretary was out to lunch and he gave me my first assignment. And so I started as a journalist and I worked for Punch magazine and Associated Newspapers, Evening Standard, Mail on Sunday. And I would do kind of profiles and interviews with what I thought to be interesting people. I remember in one week in 1993, I think it was, I interviewed Johnny Rotten of the Sex Pistols, the lead.
That must have been a hell of an interview.
We met in an Italian restaurant in Greek Street in Soho, and he ended up throwing a chair at me because he didn't like. He was promoting his book, No Black, No Irish, No Dogs, which was a great book, but he didn't like the sound of my voice and thought I was a tosser. And decided literally to throw some kind of, Art Deco chair in my general direction, which of course made it into the interview. But that same week, I interviewed, Ted Heath, the former British Conservative Prime Minister, and many, many people along the way. And I just would meet all these fascinating characters. And journalism for me was just an opportunity to try and make money writing, even though I wasn't really, that wasn't really my end goal. But it was massively fun for me to fly around the world. And I remember my first foreign assignment, I was flown by Associated Newspapers to meet this young prodigy violinist called Sarah Chang in Florence. And I met her, and she was 11, and this most brilliant musician who we heard perform some exquisite, I think it was Vivaldi, I can't remember what she was doing at the time. But, she had an entourage, her dad, her cousins, her mothers. There was like 40 adults in the room while I interviewed this 11-year-old genius. So I had these incredible kind of experiences just meeting very different types of people. And I think all of that ultimately, as you know, probably, if you know a bit of the story, is that, one of the interviews that I was sent to do in the summer of 1993 was to interview Herve Villachez, who, had been the star of Fantasy Island. And 10 years after he'd been fired by Aaron Spelling, was in quite a bad condition. And I was sort of sent to this interview kind of as a joke, while I was waiting for, frankly, something more important. So the Gore Vidal interview as it appears in the film. And ultimately that experience changed my life and led to screenwriting. And I know that sounds very strange, but I was sent from London to LA to do a series of important show business interviews, as if that really exists as a concept in reality. And Herbe Villachez was the kind of the throwaway joke piece, And they said to me, get 500 words with the midget, where are they now?
Wait, so that's because I didn't know that's Tattoo, right? Tattoo,
yeah. Herbe Villachez, Tattoo on Fantasy Island. And had been Knick-Knack in the Bond film, The Man with the Golden Gun. sort of a seminal kind of famous kind of cult figure in the 1970s, and frankly, the most famous little person and successful little person actor that had been at all.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I went in there filled with judgment and cynicism and, you know, fuck, I've got to get through. This is the dregs of the celebrity. I've been given, like, you know, the formerly famous dwarf from Fantasy Island.
The one-hit wonder almost, yeah.
You know, just so I was like, wow, this is really where my career is. You know, I'm interviewing Tattoo. I wanted to shoot myself. Well, I won't say it. Anyway, I was going to say something terrible. But anyway, so we went to meet at Le Petit Chateau in West Hollywood, and I was with this photographer who was sent from the newspaper with me, and his name was Sloane Pringle. I mean,
you can't make this up. You can't make this up.
I mean, you can't make that up. Not a stage name, Sloane Pringle. And you know, Sloane was like, "Look, we've got to get to this other place. We have half an hour. Just get your interview in." So, you know, I just went through, what was it like, Fantasy Island, The Man with the Golden Gun, the stories. And I literally was packing my shit to go away, right? To say, you know, thank you, Herve, it's been wonderful, great stories about Fantasy Island. You know, it was all the ludicrous kind of showbizy stuff we knew. And I was putting my stuff, and I turned back, and Herve had come off his chair and around the corner and was holding a knife at my throat. And I was like, I am about to be shivved to death by Tattoo. By Tattoo is about to kill me. And I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. And he wanted to get my attention. He was like, he literally said to me, you wrote the story before you got here. You prejudged me. You have no idea who I really am. You just see me as a joke, you know, on this show. And I'm just like a sort of Sunset Boulevard kind of sad past celebrity. And he was right. He was absolutely right. He wasn't really threatening me with my life. He just wanted to puncture kind of this bubble of judgment and cynicism and disinterest that I kind of clearly walked in with. And he said, if you want to hear the real story of my life, come meet me tomorrow night. So I was so shocked. I was like, you know, because my editors had said, look, 500 words, 3 paragraphs, you know, where are they now? They didn't really, but there was something about him that was so fucking compelling, so human and broken, but also interesting. I mean, he was such a charismatic person that I decided to meet him, and I ended up spending 3 days with him. And he told me his life story with such kind of emotional intensity and need. And, you know, as I'm sure any other journalist will tell you, when someone tells you the story of their lives, they become quite emotional, because how often do you tell all the major emotional events of your life and bad journalists take advantage of it? I actually found him so different to how I imagined him to be. To me, the whole thing was like a lesson about judgment and prejudgment, because I really did just see him as being defined by his size and being defined by these kind of quote unquote, you know, jokey roles. By the end of the 3 days, I was so compelled. I went to see him at the Universal Sheraton where he was staying. And I remember having this really weird feeling, and it's actually recreated in the film My Dinner with Herve. And we shot the final scene where the actual event had taken place in the same lobby of the Universal Sheraton 25 years after it had happened. It was just a very weird thing, watching the Dinklage recreate this scene with, you know, that I'd had with Herve in the same place. And, you know, I went up to his room and he had all this fan mail laid out, and it was just so sad. You know, it was like he said they still write to me, and, you know, I felt for him, man. You know, I really connected with him. I felt, here's this guy who's been basically totally destroyed by the cruel fate of, you know, his biology, and was totally rejected by his mother, and became famous. And of course, none of it really worked. You know, it worked for a time, but it, you know, and then of course he lost his mind, blew up his career, and was just, but also underneath it was really just a painter. You know, he was really a very talented artist who'd won prizes and gone to, you know, some very famous art schools in Paris. And he was the youngest painter, for example, to be exhibited in the Museum of Paris. And he was just an extraordinary character, and I really connected with him at the end. And so I remember going back, and he had all these photos of his life, and he says, you take these for your article. It'll like 2,000 slides of his whole life. And I'm like thinking to myself, my editors want like maybe one photo. And, you know, like, what am I going to do? But I felt like I had to take it. And we went down in the elevator together, and then he sort of tugged me on my sleeve, and he pulled me into very close to him, and he said, he had tears in his eyes, and he said, tell them I regret nothing. And I just had this like weird feeling of like, what the fuck is going on? I just knew something was going on. I didn't quite know what it was, but it was just so, it like sent a shiver up my spine. And I just had this connection with this weirdo that you would never think. Why would I connect with this guy? You know, it just, we had nothing in common. And yet we had everything in common. I just was newly sober. He was clearly struggling. You know, during our 3 days together, I told him that I was stopped drinking, and he was like constantly trying to get me to drink and take me to strip clubs. I mean, it was like, he was like the devil and an angel. He was just like, the most complicated, interesting, charismatic, and unusual person I think I'd ever met in my life, probably to this day. And I ended up having this bond. And anyway, so I go home to London, and I've got basically 14 hours or 12 hours of these little micro cassettes that you used to have, you know, where you record interviews. I remember listening back to this thing going, how the fuck am I going to put this in an article to take to my editors? Like, you know, they weren't really interested to begin with. And then I come back with this. Anyway, so I get a call from Kathy Self, who was his girlfriend, who I'd met during the sort of 3-day interview. And Kathy called me at home. It was a Sunday. It was like 6:15 in the evening. Sunday, September the 4th, 1993. I'll never forget it. It was a really pleasant late afternoon evening. And the phone rings. It's Kathy. And Kathy says, Herve committed suicide 4.5 hours. And I know you will have wanted to let you know that happened. And just to let you know, Herve really connected with you and is so happy that you have this interview.
Oh my God.
So I'm like listening back to these tapes now, and suddenly I have a whole new perspective. And the perspective is, this guy knows that he's going to kill himself. This is like some random, you know, English journalist, some young kid who knows nothing has been sent to interview me. I'm just going to grab him and I'm going to give him the whole story about the family, about everything. And it really was like, you know, what do I do with this? I started crying when I listened to the interview again, because I understood that he was absolutely conscious of the fact that he was telling someone his story for the very last time, and he was clearly planning to do this. I decided to change my whole perspective on the article and come at it from a point of view of, here I was walking in, this judgmental, cynical British journalist who knows nothing, and I was just completely captivated by this extraordinary character, and he opened his heart to me. And then, you know, 5 days after we see each other, he kills himself. And so the whole article was about, so I do a 5,000 word piece, and I take it into my editors at the paper, and they were like, this is great, but this is not what we asked for. We wanted you to go do a stupid, funny story. And I was like, but this is the truth. I mean, this story is important. And luckily, I had already spoken to someone else who I thought would take the story. And they agreed, okay, we'll take the story and publish it the way you wanted to do it. And I went to my newspaper. I said, you've got to give me front cover, and I need, 6 pages, whatever it is, lots of photos. Here they are, the whole thing. And so I had this extraordinary thing where they basically said, no, we sent you out there. We own the story. You're going to rewrite it. And it was really tough. And I just couldn't really do it at a certain point. And in the end, someone else rewrote the story. It was, I think, 4 pages or 2 pages somewhere in the middle of the magazine. And I really felt horrible because here I'd had incredibly important personal experience completely out of the blue with this person. I was essentially his suicide note. And here were these guys who just didn't give a shit. They were just
get it.
To me, summed up everything about British journalism and those newsrooms at the time. And the editor literally came out of the room and said, well, Gervasi's topped a midget, which means made a midget commit suicide. Where do we send him next? And everyone's laughing. And I'm like, wait, hold on a second. Like, this guy is a human being, and you guys are just, you're pigs, and they're all bitter, and they're all just, judgmental, and they're not, none of them, they probably wanted to be writers or painters or filmmakers, and none of them really were willing to take that risk. And so it's much easier to sit on the sidelines and judge than actually take a risk, and do something. And so I just that was where the idea for the film was born. And so I'd never written a script before, and it leads into my very first script. Well, I wrote a short script, a 32-page screenplay. I've never written one before, called My Dinner with Herve. And I thought, this is great. It's a short about the most famous short man in the world. What I didn't understand is that I'd written essentially an unmakeable $2 million short film that once someone looked at it, they were like, Paris in 1940 and Barbados in Sao Paulo. Like, who's paying for this? And I was like, yeah, no one's paying. Anyway, it became an interesting thing because I wrote this script from the heart to feel like I felt like the newspaper robbed me of the truth of that story. And so the script was my first attempt to tell the story from a truthful point of view. And it ended up being read by Steven Spielberg. I mean, that script that I was, got to Spielberg.
I'm sorry, the 32-page, $2 million short film about my dinner with Herve, Unmakeable. Called my dinner with Herve, about the most famous short man in the world. That script, how did that 32-page script?
Well, that's another story. You see, as what happened? So, okay, here's the story. It's a crazy story. So I had applied to UCLA Film School, and I was really on the fence about whether I wanted to go. And I got, for whatever reason, I applied to UCLA. So I was in LA doing all these interviews, Herve and the kids from Beverly Hills 90210. By the way, on the same trip that I interviewed Herve, when he pulled the knife on me, the interview I was going to was the kids of Beverly Hills 90210. That's who I also interviewed. So I'm like, I'm sitting there listening to these imbeciles talking about this terrible show, and all I'm thinking is about Tattoo shivving me and what was going to happen next. And I'm like, I was so disinterested. I was a 24-year-old. Anyway, so it was just so weird. Anyway, so I was basically I applied to UCLA because I was in LA so much, and I went back to the original dream. I was at school and I started my film club, and I loved film. And, I really wanted to see if, UCLA was a legendary school, that so many fantastic filmmakers. And I am a huge Paul Schrader fan. Mm-hmm. And Paul Schrader had been at UCLA, and Alexander Payne at UCLA, and Coppola, and just an extraordinary. And USC seemed to be like the, really successful rich kids. And UCLA was the kind of, messy disaster kids, it felt like. Anyway, it was much cheaper. I couldn't afford it. So I just applied to UCLA, and I got into UCLA. And so I was in LA. My mum said, go to LA. I knew not a single person, not one person. And so my mum had an old friend called Ruthie Snyder, who she grew up with in Toronto. My mother came from Toronto and then had moved to New York, whatever, and then to England. And she said, look up my old school friend. She hadn't seen her in like 30 years. I was like, great, I'm all hooked up in LA. I have some woman I don't even know. Anyway, so she was very kindly introduced me to her daughter, Fonda Snyder. And what happened was I got invited. She said Fonda was running a company called Storyopolis, which was a bookstore in LA, opposite the Ivy restaurant in Robertson. Mm-hmm. And Paul Allen, the Microsoft guy, was funding this kind of children's bookstore. And so she said, oh, we're doing a dinner. Do you want to come? I didn't know her at all. Anyway, so I go to this dinner, and I get there early because, I don't know anyone at all. I'm like, I'm talking to the waiters.
What year are we talking?
It's like 93, 2 in there. 92, 3, 4, 94 even, right? Something like that.
Yeah.
And anyway, so I'm in my suit, like, because I'm very English. I'll put on a suit. They can't fool me, whatever. So I go there. And I look there's these long tables, and they're having a dinner to honor the incredible author Maurice Sendak, who did Where the Wild Things Are. Yeah. So, and I'm looking at this table, and I'm looking at David Geffen, Peter Guber, but like the people coming to this dinner were like, and so Fonda was like laughing because she thought I was going to some kind of, like free festival.
Mixer.
I don't know what I was talking to. So she thought it was very funny. So anyway, so I see all these kind of luminaries. Oliver Stone was at the dinner, I think, and unbelievable. So I'm nervous as hell because I'm no one. I have no idea. I'm smoking red Marlboros like without stopping. I've smoked 2 packs. Anyway, so I go outside and I'm watching all these Hollywood luminaries through the windows. If you know where New Line used to be, opposite the Ivy, Storyopolis was all glass, and they had this kind of little area, piazza area with benches. So I'm sitting on the piazza benches, watching through the windows as like Oliver Stone and David Geffen and all these people arrive, going, what am I doing here? I was thinking about going. Anyway, so this tramp comes up to me, who was like wearing some sort of that kind of grungy Seattle look or whatever. And he was sort of a bit befuddled, and he sits down and he says, do you have a cigarette? I was like, sure. So I ended up chatting with him, and we started talking and smoking cigarettes. And he was a very nice guy. And he said, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm English. I'm actually here. I think I'm going to go to film school. And, and he says, really, what are your plans? And I said, well, I'm going to become a screenwriter. I'm going to be a screenwriter like that. And he looks at me and goes, huh. And I literally remember thinking, I looked at him and thought, maybe I can help this guy. Maybe I can just give him, I don't know, some money for the bus or something. I don't mind. I'll help. He seems nice. So anyway, so we're chatting, we're getting on incredibly well and talking about, America versus England and the favorite TV shows. And I can't remember, but it was great conversation and we're big cigarette smokers. Anyway, so I'm watching the assembled mass through the windows. We both are. And this very beautiful woman comes out and goes up to this tramp. I thought perhaps to give him money. I didn't really know. But she comes up to him and it turns out it's her husband. Okay. And she is coming to this event. And by the way, he is coming to this event. And I'm like, okay, they're letting the homeless in. It's like an all open community. I mean, we've got the luminaries, but we're working with the streets. So I was basically just like, okay, so anyway, whatever. So she says, who are you? And I said, well, I'm Sacha Gervasi. I come from London. I'm going to UCLA. I'm going to be a screenwriter. And Elizabeth says, oh, really? That's what my husband does, the tramp. And I'm like, oh, okay. So who are you? Oh, he's called Steve Zalian. He had lit God, the Oscar the previous year for his screenplay for Schindler's List. So I could not speak.
Oh my God.
I have literally met one of the greatest
living screenwriters. Yeah.
Ever. Forget it, right? Now, then, doesn't matter. Unbelievable. And so anyway, we go into the dinner. I'm like freaking out. Elizabeth finds it very funny because I'm like, you're Steve Zalian. Okay, and you're Elizabeth Zalian. Okay, great. So then I find out that I'm seated like 3 seats away from him, my card, next to the head of New Line. Anyway, Steve sees me freaking out and he finds it hilarious. Steve just found it funny as well. So they're all like laughing at me. And anyway, so I couldn't speak after that because I felt like I behaved like such a dickhead. Like there I am proclaiming I'm a screenwriter, and there I am next to the Academy Award-winning writer of Schindler's.
So the equivalent of me of a kid going to Steven Spielberg. One day I'm going to be a director, right. Not knowing that was Steven Spielberg.
I felt like I went into a massive shame spiral, and I remember just eating all the food and pigging out on dessert. I was trying to eat on my feelings. I was so nervous. I felt terrible. I felt like an imposter, and I felt like I'd really made a fool of myself in front of, essentially, I'd never seen him, but I'd read all of his screenplays. I'd read Searching for Bobby Fischer. I'd read his Awakening script. The guy was extraordinary. There was Serpentine, another script of Steve's, Bad Manners, whatever these things were, he was just an extraordinary, him and Bob Town to me were the guys, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm like meeting him, made a total fool of him. Anyway, at the end of the dinner, he comes over to me and he said, here's my phone number. If you want to have a coffee, let's have a coffee or whatever.
How many days are you in LA at this point once you arrived?
I haven't been there that long, like 3 weeks. I've arrived in LA. I know my mother's friend from high school in Toronto, and I'm meeting literally. So anyway.
Oh my God.
Now I had written my Dinner with Herve script, right? But I didn't know what I was doing. But I had this script. So he said, "Do you have anything, that I could read?" And I said, I have this script. And I told him the story of meeting Herbe, and he found that story very interesting. Yeah. Anyway, so I ended up sending him the script to where he lived in Santa Monica. I sent him the script, and I didn't hear anything.
As you know, yeah.
And I was like, okay, I've met Mick Jagger. I've given him my demo tape, and I'm a loser. And I made a fool of myself. And I offered basically to give him bus money home. I mean, it's just like a full-on disaster from start to finish. Anyway, so I was in my little $100 a week apartment that I was living in West Hollywood, and the phone goes, and this is like 3 months later. It's Steve Zalian. I'm so sorry for not getting back to you. I've been on a project that's finished now. I just happened to get to your script, and I think it's really good. Would you like to have coffee? I drive down to Diedrich's in Santa Monica. In fact, my friend Adam dropped me off because I didn't have a car. Because remember, for the first 2-3 years in LA, I did not have a car. I was traveling by bus or walking, which was fine, right? So I was I got dropped off at Diedrich's. I had a coffee with Steve, and he said, I think this is special. I think you're a writer. I think you're right to go to UCLA, and I think this is a very important and special piece of work. And I was just like,
Jesus.
I've never written anything. This was the first thing I wrote. And so in the end, without getting into it, because there's lots more obviously to chat about, he gave that script to Steven Spielberg. And so I found myself on the set of Amistad, 10 feet away from Anthony Hopkins, right on the set with Steve introduced, because Steve was also working on that, had rewritten the whole thing, was introducing me to Steven Spielberg. And I just couldn't believe it. And he complimented me on the script and said, would you like to watch? And could not have been nicer. And ultimately that led to me working with Steven on The Terminal. So it was all through Steve's Alien. Like literally, had I not had that chance meeting with Steve, had Steve not been as cool and generous and so unpretentious and kind with me, he was just extraordinary with me. Extraordinary. Like, in life when you get people who suddenly appear in a certain moment and they're like angels. That's exactly what Steve's Alien was for me. He was absolutely an angel. I would not, like everything that's happened since that moment, I would have absolutely no career without Steve and his belief in me. And at times when it was really, really tough, and I actually, anyway.
So, all right. So you basically had, and I've talked about this a lot, is because, so many screenwriters listening tonight and filmmakers as well who are listening, you look up to people like, Steve Zalian and Spielberg, and I consider them to be gods on Mount Hollywood. They're literally like Greek gods in Mount Hollywood. And when one of them decides to come down with the peasants and touches you on the shoulder and is like, you now shall be a screenwriter. You now shall be a director. That literally happened to you. And he wasn't even, and the funny thing is, if I may go full Greek mythology on you, he was like hidden. So he was in disguise almost.
Thank God, because I was totally myself. I had no idea who he was. I was giving this guy cigarettes and possibly giving him bus money home. And possibly when I became a screenwriter, helping him when I discovered he too was a screenwriter.
Oh my God, no.
It was like magic, because had I known it was Steve's Alien, I would have probably completely clammed up and been who I am. And so therefore it was a massive gift. It was like such a weird and wonderful thing. And, he and his family, and Elizabeth and Nick and Charlie, would just have been fantastic.
Well, I have to ask you, because, and I've spoken to other people on my show as well that have had these kind of magical paths. Because this is absolutely lottery ticket. This is magical in so many ways. Do you believe in there has to be some sort of fate in this, because the chances of this happening, do you believe there are other things that kind of guide? Because I truly do. Like when doors are supposed to open for you, they open for you in a magical way that you just can't understand. How I have had the opportunities to talk to certain people on my show, like yourself, and like what's happened to my show, what's happened to my career, all these other different things. When something's supposed to happen, it happens in a way that you will never know. Like, if I would have told you this exact story when you were flying over to LA to go to UCLA, you would have said, you're mad. You're mad. If I would have told you that tattoo was going to be the catalyst for your entire career, you would have said,
that's right.
You're insane. So and also, what's your feelings on that?
Also him threatening me with a knife.
Obviously. That's a given.
But the whole thing, how can you ignore that? There's obviously something going on. I'm not saying that goes on for everyone all the time. No. It doesn't go on for me all the time. But I think there are certain critical moments in life when things happen, when you meet someone. And I think it's all about being open and recognizing it, because, a lot of the time you don't recognize things. Yeah. So I got very lucky because, without getting too much into my personal story, I had a really, a pretty bad time with drugs when I was younger, and I, nearly was not here. Mm-hmm. And I think when I got out of that, was able to figure out, like, actually, I actually do want to be here. And when I sort of got clear of that, I just saw everything in a strange way as a huge blessing, because it's like, whenever things would be going badly, I would say to myself, for a dead man, you're not doing that badly. I'm alive. I definitely have that appreciation of life at a very basic level. I don't take stuff for granted. And so I think when you carry that energy, perhaps you invite sometimes positive, perhaps even negative, but in this case, very positive things. I was recently kind of, in recovery, clean and sober when I came to LA. Like, coming to LA was all about a completely new beginning. And I think when you've been through a tough time, and I'm sure many of your viewers and listeners have been through their own version of that, that there's something about getting through it where you want to live.
Yes.
And that brings stuff to you. And I think that maybe that was an example of that. I don't really know. But I was just, I think when I nearly was not here, it's very humbling.
Oh,
I think that, I think the problem is I see a lot of Hollywood, screenwriters sell their first script for a ton of money and then it all goes to their head, and I had that later, actually, I have to say. I had to call myself on that, because it does affect you, right? When people start telling you all this shit, and you have to really watch it. And I would say as a writer, particularly in Hollywood, if you don't seek humility, it will find you. It will find you.
Amen, brother. Amen.
You will be fired. You will be, taken down and denigrated and all that stuff. And so, and actually Steve Zalian gave me a great bit of advice. He said, it's a roller coaster. When the corner gets squeaky, squeeze on tight, just hold on, and I think that I've always done that. There've been some terrible, terrible moments as well as some extraordinary moments. And I think that, it is about not being a wanker. If you can, and being, when people like that, I think what happens is you get these moments of grace, and clearly that was some kind of a miracle with Steve. It's when the ego cuts in and it starts taking credit for all that shit, you get into a lot of trouble. So you have to just count your blessings and go, thank you, rather than start making it about you. And that is something that, we're all prone to at different times, but you've got to watch for that. And I've certainly, if I haven't been watching for it, I've learned the lesson the hard way.
I mean, the ego is the ego is one of the thing that we all fight every single day. And I believe in the film industry more so than ever, because man, it is so enticing.
Like, a screenwriter having an ego is kind of like, that knight in the Monty Python who gets his arm knocked off and then his leg.
It's just a flesh wound.
It's merely a flesh wound, and then it's like a quivering stump. That's like a screenwriter with an ego.
Come here, I'll take you.
It's like, you better not, it's just a waste of your energy. You just better get real and take your breaks when you get them, and pass it on. That's the key thing.
Yes.
It's like, if people come into your path and you feel, even if you can make a tiny difference, but don't delude yourself into thinking you can do what someone like Steve Zalian or Steven Spielberg can do. But if you can actually help someone, even if it's reading a script or listening or whatever, do it, man, because you got given that times 10. And I think it's, in a strange way, it's your duty to do that.
It's the pay it forward.
That's what was done for you. So I just think if you're coming from basically a place of honesty and fairness and trying not to be a tosser, and catching yourself when you are, then, you're going to be all right. You're going to survive the crazy turns of the roller coaster and the ups and downs and the rapids in the river. And there will be plenty, as I'm sure, most of your, writers know. It's just very, and you can go from the hottest thing to the coldest and and it's like, try not to pay attention to the temperature reading, focus on the process and the long-term plan, because, today's hottest screenwriter is tomorrow's coldest. I've got the best reviews and the very worst. It's like you'll have all of it. Try not to buy into it too much. I think just focus on, okay, I got to deliver this script and I got to deliver this movie or whatever. Stay in what you do, and don't worry about the other bullshit.
And look at Herve. I mean, he was the hottest, biggest thing.
Totally.
In the 70s, you just couldn't. He was everywhere. I mean, he was so hot, and look where he ends up.
That was the lesson of the Herve story, and it all went to his head. And he got into it with Ricardo Montalban, and he wanted a trailer as big, and basically Spelling fired him because he was completely out of control, and he was destroyed. He went from a TV star on an ABC show getting $30,000 or $40,000 a week in 1979, 80, 81.
Jesus Christ, yeah.
To when I found him having to flush his toilet by taking water out of his swimming pool, to flush the toilet because the water had been cut off. It was really extreme. So yeah, he was a kind of example to me, and I also felt for him because there was clearly he had realized that he'd kind of completely fucked himself,
Jesus.
And his ego was not his amigo, as they say,
Oh, I like that.
It blew everything up. So anyway, yeah, there are so many examples of that, of just don't take the work seriously. Just don't take yourself too seriously.
Now, so let me ask. All right, so you're working with the Steves, on Terminal. What is that like? Did Steve bring you in? I think it almost sounds like he Donnie Brasco'd you. He's like, he's a good fella. He can come in with me. So he kind of like vouched for you. You walked in, and Steve's like, I want to work with you on the Terminal. How did you, first of all, how do you collaborate with him?
Well, it was Walter Parks, really, who I worked with mostly. Walter Parks, who was then running DreamWorks, also a brilliant producer, who we developed the script together. And then initially what happened was that Tom Hanks came into it. I'm just thinking my first meeting with Tom Hanks. Tom Hanks said he would like to do the script. And then I went to meet him at his office in Santa Monica, and it was unbelievable. It was hilarious.
Well, what happened? What happened when you met Tom Hanks?
I can't remember. I think I said, I've got to do something really notable. I'll come up with a joke. So I think I came into his office, and Walter Parks said, and here's Tom Hanks. And I looked at Tom, and I looked at Walter, and I said, but you said Tom Hulse. And Tom Hanks was like... And then he laughed his head off, and then we became friends.
Oh my God, that's amazing. That's amazing.
I want a notable entry. It was hilarious. So we ended up having a good time, and I ended up being hired. So anyway, so he came on to Terminal. He wanted to do it. And then originally, actually, Sam Mendes was going to direct the film. And I met with Sam, and Sam was like, don't change a word of the script. And then it sort of all went quiet, and it was really weird. I was on a research trip with Tom Hanks in Europe, and we were working on this other project that unfortunately never got made. It was called Comrade Rockstar. It was a great project, and Tom was very into it at the time. And so we flew on the DreamWorks jet, which was also another.
Of course. Why wouldn't you?
I went with Tom and Walter, and we went to Berlin to do research and meet various people to do with the Comrade Rockstar story. And we were staying at the Adlon Hotel in Berlin. And, at this point, I didn't know what was happening with Terminal. I knew Tom was interested in it. I knew we were developing this other thing. And so Tom was on the Catch Me If You Can, press junket tour. Right. And I remember I got a call. Tom's driver or whatever called and said, there's a car downstairs, go and have dinner with Tom, right? So I got into the car, and I go into this restaurant in Berlin, which I think was called Von or Vow. I can't remember. It was this big room with a gallery and a main floor. And there was this table of 20 people. And there was an empty chair at the end. And there was Walter Parks, Leonardo DiCaprio, Ethan Suplee, Tom Hanks or whatever. And then there was a guy not facing me, Anyway, so I walked in, and Tom was with Steven. And Tom said, Steven, Sacha's here. And Steven Spielberg turned around to me, and he said, congratulations, we shoot November the 5th. And I was like, what? What are we shooting? His moment where he said, I'm going to direct the Terminal. And I just was like, they were all laughing at me because I was just so...
I feel that I hear a theme here that I hear a theme here, Sacha, that when these giants, when the gods get together and they see the commoners walking among us, they like to poke fun at them, essentially, is what I hear.
Well, it was the same thing with Tom Hanks. It was the sweetest of all of the people.
Right.
So, in fact, when Tom Hanks told me he was going to attach himself to the script, he said, I was at his office, he said, will you drive me home? I said, sure. I didn't really know. I thought maybe he couldn't afford Uber. I didn't really understand.
Yeah, don't give him change for the bus like you were going to do, Steve.
So I gave some bus tickets to Zalian, and then I thought, I'll help him with some vouchers. Anyway, so I'm driving... So Tom, this is a true story. So the mirror story is I'm driving with Tom. He's in the passenger seat. I'm driving. Very excited. I've sold my first script, and I've of course got a Cadillac because I'm an idiot. I'm finding that amusing. He said, "You're from Britain? Why did you lease a Cadillac?" And I said, "Because I'm from Britain." And so anyway, I'm driving along, and he says, "I'm just going to hold the steering wheel for just a minute." And I said, sure. Do you? Okay. So he holds the wheel and he turns to me and he says, I'm going to star in Terminal. And I was like, because he knew I was going to have a moment. And so he held the wheel. So Tom did that. And then we had the when Steven Spielberg told me he was directing the film in Berlin. So it was quite, you got to understand, this is my second movie. So I've done a small hairdressing comedy called The Big Tease at Warner Brothers that no one saw, which we made for $4 million. And then, suddenly I'm doing a Spielberg Hanks movie, number 2.
Right.
So it was like complete madness.
Oh my God. Now, but I have to ask you, because I told you off air, I absolutely adore The Terminal. I adore it. My wife and I watch it every few years because every once, between the story and the characters, and of course Hanks's performance and in Steven's direction. I mean, how did that story come together? Like, it's based on a real story, right?
Based on a true story called Alfred Nasseri, who lived for many years at Paris Airport, Charles de Gaulle. He was an Iranian dissident. It was a true story. Iranian dissident who had escaped, who'd escaped into France illegally and came back to go to his home country. They discovered that he would probably be imprisoned or executed if he got on the plane back to Tehran. And so, but at the same time, he'd illegally been in France, so they wouldn't let him back out. And they said, just wait in the terminal a minute. So that was a whole story with, a lot of political complexity, and it was about many things. And we decided, well, look, let's just take the scenario of the man stuck in the airport based on the true story, and let's do something slightly different. So that became, Victor Navorsky and Krakozia and all of that stuff that was in the film. So, it's great because people love that movie. What some people loved it initially, not everyone, but over the years, it's become this kind of, it has this own life. And in England, I started to realize it's become a Christmas film on the BBC. Like 5 years ago, it either plays Christmas Eve or Christmas Day on BBC One or BBC. It's sort of a bit of a tradition now. I didn't really realize that. But it's obviously great to be part of something like that. It was an extraordinary experience having this film made by obviously some of the greatest people I'd studied at film school. And then, 6 months I'm working with them. Listen, without those guys, and Spielberg was he was extraordinary with me, incredibly generous. And it was hard, when this is happening to you, you don't really understand what's happening, and you don't handle it brilliantly. I didn't really. It's only like now, years later, that you really understand, my God, Steven Spielberg decided to make your movie. Wow. I kind of knew it at the time, but I really know now. And I really feel grateful to Steven and to Tom and to Walter and to Steve Zalian for really creating that whole scenario. So, I'm lucky.
Lucky. I can only imagine reading a textbook with Steven Spielberg in it, and then a few months later... or a year later working with him. I can't even comprehend that. Now you are not just a screenwriter, you're also a director. How did you make the jump from screenwriting to directing?
Well, I just decided that I was going to direct something. I wanted to be a director always. And then I thought, because what happened after Terminal was that I got offered lots of kind of big studio comedy rewrites and stuff, And I thought, I obviously had this incredible experience, but I didn't really want to be, just doing big assignments all the time. I really wanted to see if I could be a filmmaker and to, have a go. So I realized no one was really going to give me a chance. And I realized that I'd have to, think it through on my own. I knew this band, and then I will tie into what we talk about later with our mystery special guest.
Yes,
I knew this band when I was 15, called Anvil, a Canadian heavy metal band, and I met them when I was 15 at the Marquee Club in London in 1982, and I got into the dressing room and I ended up talking to them. They'd never been to London before. They were my heroes. I said, "Have you been here?" They said, "No." I said, "I'll give you a tour of London." I ended up taking Anvil, the band behind Metal on Metal and Strength of Steel and Hard and Heavy. I ended up taking them on a tour of the Houses of Parliament, the Tate Gallery, and I took them back home to meet my mother. You can imagine how thrilled she was when she opens the door to find me with the 4 members of Anvil.
15-year-old.
with posters on the wall of that band. She said, "You've got 10 minutes. Get them out of here." Anyway, so I introduced them to my mom. Anyway, they would find me quite entertaining, and I found them entertaining. They said, "Look, what are you doing next summer?" I said, "Well, I'm on school holiday. Do you want to come on the road with us?" Rob Reiner, the drummer of Anvil, was named Rob Reiner, like as in the director of Spinal Tap. You couldn't, again, make that shit up. And Rob said, "Would you like to be my drum tech on this tour?" So following summer, I lied to my mum. She was never letting me go on tour with Anvil. I told my dad, they were split up. He lived in New York. I said, "I'm going to spend the summer with my dad." Went to my dad, and I said, "I'm going on tour with this heavy metal band. Will you meet them to give me your blessing?" And my father had, taught economics at Oxford. So, the Anvil was not his core demographic band. And they met, and he was, he gave them a talking to and said, "Protect my son." But he gave me the go-ahead to go on tour. And we went on a tour of Canadian hockey arenas in the summer of 1984. And I learned how to play drums from the drummer of Anvil, Rob Reiner, on that tour, and had, an incredible experience. I was just really young. I went on 3 tours, I think, 83, 4 and 5, or 4, 5 and 6. I can't remember. But I was a drum roadie. I was a roadie. So I met those guys, and I loved them. And I remember this young guy, this young Danish tennis prodigy or player called Lars Ulrich, who was around my age, who was around at the time, an Anvil fan, and Scott Ian, who later went on to be Anthrax. And basically, 20 years passed, I lost touch with Anvil. And then I realized that, all the bands they'd influenced, Metallica, Anthrax, Megadeth, or whatever, they'd all become mega bands. And Anvil had disappeared. I went online. I figured out what was happening. And I figured out that they were playing like pub gigs in like Northern Ontario. They were still going after 30 years. And I was like, "Why are you still going?" So I wrote to the lead singer, whose name is Lips. And I said, "Come to California." Lips flew out. He was wearing exactly the same Scorpions t-shirt he'd been wearing last time I'd seen him in 1987. He was like frozen in time. And he was going, "My band's going to make it, man. It's going to be great. We're going to do it." And I was like, thinking to myself, he is completely mental. Like, what is he talking about? It's over, right? But there was something so infectious. And actually, I took him to see Steve's Alien, my mentor, that weekend when he was in LA. And I'm sitting there with Steve making coffee, and we're looking out as Lips is talking to Steve's wife, Elizabeth. And he's saying, "Who the hell is this guy?" And I told him the whole story. And he said, "There's a movie there. There's a movie about friendship and not giving up on your dream. And it's bittersweet, and you should direct it." And I said, "Wow." And I did. And it became Anvil. So it was one of those
Anvil, the story of Anvil.
The story of Anvil. And I just rolled the dice. No one was going to pay for it. I financed it myself. And within, I think, 12 weeks of that encounter with Steve down at the beach with Lips, I was in northern Romania shooting Anvil on one of the worst tours that have you seen the film? I mean, it was beyond a disaster.
Oh my God.
And so that movie then, became my directorial debut, which then came into Sundance. And, still to this day, actually, people love that movie because it really is about not giving up. And it really is about, doing something for the right reasons and passion and, all of that stuff.
Absolutely remarkable. So that documentary, which has become a cult phenomenon, people love that movie. And you were telling me, like, everyone says it's your best work ever.
Well, people love that film. It's also done from a place of total naivety, innocence, and I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm just following a feeling. And I think the film captures that, the essence of it. And it just has traveled so far and wide. And it was like an amazing story because here was this band. The movie, in one sense, is essentially a portrait in failure. And yet every band loves this film. And in fact, AC/DC were doing a stadium tour and invited Anvil to open for them. And I remember standing on the side of the stage with Anvil, a giant stadium, and 50,000 people are shouting, "Anvil, Anvil, Anvil." And it was just like, you never know what's going to happen. You just never know. Like, we had no idea that any of that stuff, we had no idea that, that they went to the Total Rock Awards. Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin came up with Anvil to thank them for inspiring him to keep doing what he's doing. And it's like, it was just like we were at the Bowery Hotel in New York, and I was with Anvil, and I was, and Lips is smoking a cigarette on the terrace of the Bowery, and he comes out and he said, "There's this really interesting guy and another guy, and they really like the movie, and I don't know who they are. Maybe you could go talk to them for me. I'd like to know more about them." Anyway, so I go out with Lips, and it's Chris Martin of Coldplay and Jay-Z, and they're talking to Lips about Anvil, and I'm like, they had no idea. They had no idea who anyone was. They live in this
They live in this 80s bubble.
Yeah, I mean, at the premiere in Hollywood, we did the premiere at the Egyptian Theatre. Dustin Hoffman came to the premiere, and he's in tears after the movie, coming up to Lips and Rob, and Rob's like has no idea who he is. And then after about 10 minutes, he turns to me and he goes, "Is that the guy from Papillon?" Yes, it is the guy from Papillon.
Papillon.
So that's what's wonderful about them, is they just live in their own magical world. But were it not for that, there would have been no movie to make about, and that movie, I think, has inspired, other bands, and certainly a lot of other movies about bands told from an emotional point.
Amazing. So then, okay, so from Anvil, I love the title, Anvil, the story of Anvil, which is such a great title. So once that happens, that's a documentary. But then you're thrown into more narrative work, and one of the films you worked on was Hitchcock, which that's that, but it's all to do with Anvil, right? So, how did Anvil get you Hitchcock?
So what happened was that Tom Pollock, who was another angel of mine, who had run Universal from 85 to 95, incredible guy, and he was partners with Ivan Reitman, and they had Montecito Pictures, and they financed, and they did, and they were fantastic. They just supported young filmmakers. I actually got my first fan letter about Anvil was from Tom Pollock, who saw the film and said, "This makes the old guys think they can keep going, and I want to meet you." Anyway, so they had this assignment for Hitchcock. And I was like, okay, obviously Hitchcock, I'm fascinated with the subject. Sure. I thought it was based on this thing that Hitchcock and the Making of Psycho. I thought the book was brilliant. And I was just like, so I thought, okay, my agent said, well, just go in and meet Tom Pollock. He likes your movie Anvil. And the meeting began with, "It's lovely to meet you. We love Anvil. You're not going to get this job. But anyway, it's nice to meet."
We just wanted to meet you.
Yeah. And I was just like, when someone says something's not going to happen, you're just like, fuck it. Okay, whatever. So I said, this has got to be about Alma and, the unknown force behind Hitch. And it's got to be fun and irreverent and tongue in cheek, hopefully. And it's, it's only a movie, don't take it too seriously. It's meant to be sort of droll in the way that Hitchcock was. So I pitched them this. Anyway, they were like, well, this is great, but, Anthony Hopkins, pretty major actor, probably you're not going to get past him. Anyway, he was a massive Anvil fan. I had no idea. Anvil Hopkins was an Anvil fan. That's what fucking Anvil do.
Oh my God.
It just goes to show, like the Herbe Anvil thing. You're coming from a place of you're doing it for your own fucking reasons. Fuck everyone else. And somehow that traveled. So Tony was like, let's do the film. And then Helen was like, love it. Need a bit more of the Alma. So I did some work on the script. It was John McLaughlin's script, but I did do a little work on the Alma role. And and then the movie came together and Searchlight made the film. So, it was, and then I got Scarlett Johansson. I did have this weird moment where I was in rehearsals with Anthony Hopkins and Helen Mirren, and I was like, I can't believe I'm actually in that. I can't believe they're talking to me, let alone listening to a potential suggestion. Anyway, I learned so much. I mean, you can imagine working with those people and Scarlett Johansson and Jeff Cronenweth and the incredible Pam Martin, who cut The Fighter, was cutting the movie, and working with Searchlight. I mean, it was an extraordinary learning experience.
I you just said I can't believe. I think if there's a biography about you ever, it's going to be called I Can't Believe. I just can't believe this is happening, because from everything you've told me, there's just been one amazing event after another. And I know, look, these are the highlights, and I know there's been ups and downs throughout anybody's life. Yeah. But again, just like Herve, just like Steve Zalian, and then you're like, oh, you're never going to get past Anthony Hopkins. He goes, oh, I saw your documentary. I'm a huge Anvil.
And I've seen it 3 times. Yeah, it's like...
What are the chances that the legendary Anthony Hopkins would be a fan of basically a failed metal band from the 80s that you happen to make a documentary about because you, by the way, happen to be their roadie?
The thing that people should take from all of this is that deep down... No, the thing that people should take from all this is that deep down inside, Anthony Hopkins feels like a failed metal band from the 80s. We all have these feelings. of like, it's human, right? We all, we're always on ourselves, and we're more critical of ourselves than perhaps anyone else is. And it's, so it was very truthful. It was about flawed human beings who are trying their best, who don't actually necessarily succeed. And I'd say of all the people I've met, some of whom are massive successes, they don't necessarily think like that or feel that. They often just carry the wounds of the failures with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Strangely, it's just a weird thing that I've observed. I don't know if it's true, but I think that's sometimes true. So, some of the greatest successes feel like failures.
Oh, no, I mean, I could get 1,000 good reviews, but I'll focus on the one bad review. And
of course.
It's just, it's human nature. And it's so overwhelming because you've obviously been giving literally 1,000 reviews that are fantastic, but there's that one guy or gal who just like, you know what? Terminal.
Yeah.
But then there's 1,000 other ones that are just like
great terminal review. No, there was a great terminal review in an English newspaper. I can't forget it. It's a terrible review.
Yeah.
They said something like, watching this film was like standing in a waterfall of vomit and treacle.
Oh my God. What a visual.
And I just thought,
that's
okay.
brilliant.
But what I'm saying is I just remember that. I don't remember anything else apart from that. Like the worst kind of shiv, and I don't know, maybe that's just human nature.
I was talking to Troy Duffy, the famous director from Boondock Saints.
Sure.
That whole
legendary
documentary as well. And he told me, he's like, there was this one review. And he goes, by the LA Times, I think. It was so brilliantly written that if you're going to get smashed by someone, at least let it be a really good writer, because it was entertaining. It was world-class beating.
You're gonna have to deal with that, man. You're gonna have to deal with getting shivved in every part of your body by someone. At some point, you're gonna have a knife sticking out of you. But you've got to kind of also ignore it. It's like, having been a reviewer myself and having been a journalist, I really do understand what's on the other side of that. A lot of those people are blocked creatives. They're blocked filmmakers who aren't able to actually do it themselves for whatever reasons. Either they don't have the talent or the courage or both or whatever, or it just hasn't happened. So they're kind of bitter slightly, some of them. And others are really constructive, and they use the criticism to try and say, actually, here's how you could have done a better job. And here's, and you can actually learn from a great review. You learn a ton of shit. So it's important to be aware of them and look for the stuff that you can learn from, rather than taking any of it too seriously. Because when it gets like nasty, the person's got like an axe to grind. Like, people have they've got an agenda that's not really about, like sometimes you read a review of something and you go, and you've seen the film and you go, they obviously did not see the same film. In fact, they watched the film. They just had, this is a review based on the idea of what they wanted it to be. And what I would say is, then go make your film. You know what I mean? But everyone's entitled to be creative in their own way. Anyway, so it's you can learn though. I think you can learn. From
no, absolutely. I mean, Roger,
or by highly entertained by the standing in a waterfall of treacle and vomit, which is.
I mean, that's amazing. But like Roger Ebert literally got the Pulitzer for his criticism, his film criticism, and he's one of those. And he loved filmmakers. And I have a Roger Ebert story I'll tell you off air afterwards, that when he was kind to a short film of mine.
Well, I mean, for example, when we had Anvil, right? Yeah. We didn't know if anyone was even going to see it, let alone review it. And it was incredible. I got the New Yorker one week, and we had 2.5 pages from Anthony Lane, who's one of the greatest reviewers. And he said, this is all about mortality and aging, and this is the ravages of time. And I was like, oh my God. But what I'm saying is, in the circumstance, people will get stuff from it that you didn't even intend. That you do something for a pure point of view, you do something for an emotional point of view, or you want to tell a certain story. And if there's something pure about it, people will bring in their own interpretations, which you had no idea, So I feel lucky when that happens, and it has a couple of times, and I feel good about it. And the other stuff you learn from.
Now, I wanted to touch on something really quick with you, because you've obviously played, you've roamed in circles with, legendary filmmakers, and you've worked with studios, and you've worked inside the machine. Can you touch a little bit about the politics of working and navigating those waters? Because
I would say what I've learned is very simple: is listen to everyone. Executives, producers go crazy if they feel they have not been heard. I just think that when you're in a development meeting, a writer or a director shuts an idea down without entertaining it, that person gets really mad. And look, to be fair, those people are considering giving you millions of dollars to go off and make your dream come true and tell your story. The least you could do is at least listen to them. Doesn't mean you have to take their suggestion, but at least be civil and at least do that. And I see a lot of people get into problems where they're just like, that guy's an idiot. He's also writing you a check for $10 million. How about listening to that part of it? But there are certain techniques. When you do have someone in the creative mix who's absolutely stupid, you just keep that to yourself. First of all, you don't say anything. And then you can do something called IOI, which is a technique I use. Have you heard of IOI?
I've not.
Okay, it's a term called, it stands for the illusion of inclusion, where what you do is you listen to their absolutely stupid idea and you pretend to entertain. You go, that's great, I'm going to try that, knowing that it's dumb. And you just let them feel that they've been considered and that their thoughts have been entertained. So but just be nice to everyone, even if it's like, this should take place on a skateboard on the moon, just go, okay, let's see what we can do with that. So I just think it's best to be polite and use the IOI technique if in doubt, because, there's nothing worse than a frustrated filmmaker who wants you to do something and who is not a filmmaker, but who's an executive or a producer or, someone who, everyone just wants to be heard. So that's one thing I would do, is listen to everyone. Right. And even if you disagree, just be politic. Just don't tell people they're idiots. People do not like to hear that they're idiots.
And by the way, and you might, and this is something I've seen throughout my being a student of the industry for the last 20 odd years, is that there might be a moment where you have the power and you are hot and you have the power to crush somebody. Yeah. But that power generally doesn't hang forever. And there will be a moment where you go down. I mean, even Steven Spielberg, I remember 91 when Hook came out, everyone was like, it's over. It's over. He's done. He's done. And Hook, by the way, is still one of my favorite. I love Hook. But it didn't do well. And he's like, oh, he's washed up. He's not. And then Jurassic Park and Schindler's List same year.
Schindler's List in the same year. But, I'm sure he probably took that as like, well, screw these guys. I'll show them. Sometimes being knocked down. No, but really, it brings right. It's like anger is a powerful emotion. If you could direct it in the right way, it's like it's a very powerful thing. I think when I directed Anvil, I was like, I got something to prove, man. I'm gonna do it. Like, I'm just doing it, right? And I think that, so use it. Like, whatever your cards are, even if they're shit, use the power. Of what they give you, even if it is disappointment, anger, frustration. People write you off all the time, and they take delight in it. There's nothing in Hollywood than the Schadenfreude aspect, right? Luckily, I hang out with a group of filmmakers who are extremely supportive of one another. Like, for example, Alexander Payne, whoever it is, we read each other's scripts, we're supported. We give each other notes and thoughts and stuff. I try and support all other filmmakers. Because it's so hard.
Oh my God. So
you
hard.
want sitting in judgment and kind of belittling people and trying to, it's just not the way to live, because if that's what you put out, that's obviously what you're going to get back. If you put out support, genuine help and generosity, that's what comes back to you.
Amen.
It's very, very simple. So it's really maths. It's physics, actually. Just be smart about it. And the people who are hot and take advantage and put people down and act like they're hot shit, guess what? It ain't going to last. And you will come a time when you want people, when you're down, to be supportive of you. And because you were such an asshole when you were hot, they won't do that. There's many careers where people were so unpleasant as they went up that when they got hit, no one wanted to help. The knives come out. Endless executives, studio heads, filmmakers. So just learn, what is it that a wise man learns from his own mistakes, a genius learns from the mistakes of others. Just look around, because if you just learn from what other people do, just take that information Take it.
Now I'm going to ask you a few questions I ask all of my guests, because I know I could talk to you for about another hour, and I might actually with our mystery guest in a little bit. But a few questions I ask all my guests. What are 3 screenplays every screenwriter should read?
Well, for me, I would absolutely say that Chinatown.
Yeah.
I would absolutely say that Steve Zalian's shooting script of Schindler's List is extraordinary. God, there are so many. The Godfather.
Yeah, of course.
Unbelievable. The Graduate script is incredible.
Oh, what a great movie.
Sunset Boulevard is incredible. Even I read recently, again, the original Magnificent Seven script is extraordinary. So those are the kind of scripts that were, and a useful technique if you're blocked as a writer, which I've been many, many times. They nearly threw me out of UCLA at the end of the first year because I didn't finish a script. I started 3 and finished none. A great thing is take a great script like it's Chinatown and begin typing it out, as in copying it out. So when I've had a block, I'll take a Robert Towne script or a Steve Zalian script or a Scott Frank script, depending on, and I'll sit down and I'll begin typing it out. You unblock. Maybe because when you've got 9 pages into Chinatown, and that's something just by the proximity, the engagement with the energy of that kind of intellect and ferocious kind of
interesting
brilliant. It just somehow could just push your block. So it's a technique I just discovered by accident because I was so frustrated. And I actually started writing Schindler's List. If you actually go and copy a script out, it is great for unblocking. That's what I found.
What I found when I'm writing, one of the things I found as well is like when I get blocked in something, I'll actually just go back to the beginning and just start reading. And just that process of going, it's kind of like getting it's kind of getting the momentum going. So as you're reading, then it just kind of, and then you.
But there's a potential trap there, Alex, which is you can also have people who spend 10 years polishing the first 30 pages. It's important to write I learned this lesson. You've got to write a complete bad script first. Just get to the end, even if it's total shit, because it's much harder to go from nothing to something than from something to something better. So just get to the end, even if it's trash. Another trick people use is write the end scene first. So you kind of know, okay, I'm getting there, so you don't have this big, wild sort of massive unknown ahead of you. You're going to end on this scene, which you've already written. So I would say that I agree with you. The layering and the going back and forth is important. But I also know people who can get stuck in the pattern of writing the first 30 to 50 pages and then over and over. No. Just write the rest.
I go back to like that scene or a couple scenes back. I try not to go back all the way to the beginning, because if I go away at the beginning, I get caught. And you're right. It's like this kind of whirlpool.
Exactly.
That gets you caught.
I mean, if you're a good writer, or you think you're a good writer, that you have to work yourself into a place where you're basically taking notes and you're basically getting something. It's not about you creating it. It's about you allowing it. It's doing the kind of grunt work so that you can kind of deserve actually to get what it is. You have to sort of earn it through hard work, if that makes sense.
And I think this is, I believe this completely, is when I'm writing, I honestly, sometimes I don't even know who's writing. Like it's almost channeling, if you will. Yeah. Like something is just like they're talking and it's talking by themselves. And I'm like, okay, I'm just here to write this stuff out. Do you, as a writer, do you feel that as well?
I think in the best cases, I remember when I was really writing the draft of Terminal that Spielberg said that he wanted to do, I remember being in a zone for the first time where it was just like I was irrelevant. I was just in the stream, just kind of servicing whatever this story was that wanted to come through. And it's blissful because you're just able to you're not responsible for it. You're not the source of it, but you're doing the work. You're earning your place by kind of like servicing, your creativity. And it's a freeing feeling. And actually, when you're starting to write, it's a lot of work and it's horrible and you get headaches and you want to distract yourself with any number of things. But if you just push through, then you reach that time where it's just like, okay, the thing basically is working on its own now, and you just allow it to kind of pull you where it wants to go rather than you determining everything. I think that's the difference. You go from cerebral to kind of creativity being the spirit that pulls you through the thing and gets it done. I did not do the best work I've done. Like it comes from somewhere, hopefully. There's some source out there. And I think people who take credit and think that they're geniuses, I don't know. I would say that if they're being honest, they know that, they're merely the facilitator, I think. Don't think they're the facilitator, then they'll probably have a crash at some point anyway.
Absolutely. Now, what advice would you give a screenwriter wanting to break into the business today?
Write a fucking good script. I mean, it's as simple as that.
Put that on a t-shirt, sir. Put that on a t-shirt.
It's not like having going to the right parties and meeting people. There's a certain amount of bullshit that you can do and have the right agent. But at a certain point, your script will find its home if you just focus on the work. Just focus on the work, not the bullshit or the trades or, what your
what's hot, what's hot, what's not.
And don't jump on a bandwagon and don't, just try and be you. So I do think these screenwriting courses, I found UCLA massively helpful. The full-time program, but there's also the professional program is fantastic. There are some great teachers in it. Go and meet other writers, man. Find your group of people, that you respect and trust. Work together, support each other, read each other's material, engage, but focus on the material because the material will get the actors will get the film made, because actors want a great role. So if you're writing strong roles, you can focus on getting good at that, it will fall into place. That's my feeling.
Now, what is the lesson that took you the longest to learn, whether in the film industry or in life?
I obviously am still learning it. So I don't quite, just to be really grateful for every positive thing that is happening right now. Like right now. Because that's really all we've got. I've got right now, I'm really enjoying this chat with you, right?
Thank you.
The fact, but because as we're doing this, I never really obviously do stuff like this very often. When I'm promoting a film, I'll do an interview. I never really do an in-depth chat or anything like this. So for me, as you're asking me these questions, I'm like remembering all the fighting I had to do to get all of these films made, to get them seen, to get anyone to be bothered. And it just reminds me that, I just feel lucky and grateful for that. So what I'm saying is right now I'm in that because you're replaying to me all this stuff. I don't think about this stuff. So I think staying present, focusing on the work. I would say, be genuine. Be genuine in your dealings with people. Be genuine in the emotion you're trying to put on the page. If it's being funny, be genuinely funny. Like do stuff for you, not because you think other people are going to like it.
Yes.
Most authentic to your voice. Like Anvil is a movie that literally no other person could have made apart from me. My Dinner with Herve is a movie that literally no other person could have made apart from me. What are those stories that are so singular to you and your existence and your experience and what you want to say in the world that you alone must do them? And I think if you're coming from that place, you can just get through a lot of bullshit. Life is short, man. We're not here for that long. So full on, man. So you may as well go for it and don't bullshit around. And also procrastination. I think that's a lesson I could still learn. I still procrastinate. I still, go, well, maybe I'll watch that daytime TV show. It's really fascinating. I really want to learn about haymaking in Flanders in 1765. It's fascinating. No, it's just I don't want to face the pain of the fact that I am a shit writer who must earn my place at the table every time to become a slightly better writer. You write a really good, you feel good about it. You go back to beginning, page one's blank. You're total shit again. All that experience is gone. You've got to climb another mountain, and it's just as fucking hard. That's my experience. So don't procrastinate, still working on it. But I would say I've probably wasted 2 full years of watching bad daytime soap operas, televisions, game shows, and useless historical programs.
This is pre-Netflix.
Pre-Netflix. I would like to get that.
Now, what did you learn from your biggest failure?
Only work at studios where you like the studio head. I won't name who that is. Yes, you learn. In the immortal words of Yes keyboardist Rick Wakeman, who played keyboards for Yes, he said, "Success is buried in the garden of failure."
And last question, sir.
Yes.
3 of your favorite films of all time.
Oh my God, With Nail and I. With Nail and I. Have you heard of With Nail and I? Bruce Robinson, genius film.
Yes, a long time. Yeah, was that 80s?
Yeah, he
Yes.
was Oscar nominated for The Killing Fields.
Yes,
My
yes,
first
yes, 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 yes.
inspiration. I went to see With Nail and I, terribly uncommercial film, one of the most brilliant films of all time, Richard E. Grant. Bruce wrote and directed the film. If I were to pitch that film, no one would buy it. Two unemployed actors go away to Wales for the weekend. That's the plot of With Nail and I.
Okay.
And yet, it is absolutely fucking brilliant. Sweet Smell of Success, one of the best scripts ever. Burt Lancaster, Tony Curtis, Clifford Odets, Ernest Lehman, James Wong Howe is the cameraman. It is Alexander McKendrick directed it. A brilliant. So I'd say that. Also Chinatown. I have to go with Chinatown again.
Obviously.
So With Nail and I, Sweet Smell of Success, Chinatown, and also Chris Smith's American movie. I love American movie.
Oh my God, so good.
And of course, Spinal Tap.
Yes.
But I will also say Bertolucci's underrated masterpiece, The Last Emperor, won the Best Academy Award 87.
So good.
But if you go back and look at that film, it's unbelievable. I have a 35mm print of it. So those are some of my films. I love the Bond movies, obviously not the Pierce Brosnan period. A little bit lament. But yeah, so stuff like that. Any Jacques Tati is fantastic. And all of that Jacques Tati stuff made its way into the original script of Terminal. So yeah, those are films, British films. I also love the Long Good Friday with Bob Hoskins. And Ellen.
Yeah, with Bob. Yeah,
fantastic British film.
Sacha, I know we can keep talking for hours about you are easily one of the most interesting screenwriters I've ever had on the show. Your adventures are mythical almost in its way. So
drug fueled.
I mean, this is Hollywood.
This is off drugs, Alex. This is me off.
Exactly. But I appreciate your time, man. Thank you so much for being on the show and dropping another session.
Projects next, right?
We're going to go right into it. We're going to bring in the special guests next, but I wanted to finish this segment first and give a little bit of a break to everybody, and then they will listen to the next segment after. But thank you, Sacha, so much for being on.